One of my favorite animated series of all time is Black Lagoon. Based on the manga by Rei, Black Lagoon tells the story of Rokuro Okajima, nicknamed Rock, a Japanese businessman born with his life and is on the bottom end of the corporate hierarchy. However, on one day on a business trip to the South Pacific, he's kidnapped by a band of modern-day pirates, and when his boss leaves him for dead, he later joins these pirates. They are known as the Lagoon Company, which is made up of Dutch, the captain, Benny the tech whiz, and Revy, the muscle and weapons expert. Here, Rock and his crew must navigate the criminal underworld of the Thai city of Ranapur, where they come into contact with various colorful characters, such as the Russian mob, the Chinese triads, neo-Nazis, mercenaries, nuns with guns, and Hank Hill with a flamethrower.
That's a clean burning hell, I tell you what.
This show is balls to the walls crazy with exciting action scenes that seem like a mixture between Grand Theft Auto and a John Woo film. Black Lagoon is also best known for its ensemble of badass female characters. These ladies take no shit from anyone and sure know how to kick some ass, as you don't want to screw with them. However, despite their awesomeness, there is a tragic tale to these women. Many didn't want to be badass, in fact, they wanted normal lives. But due to circumstances out of their control, they became the brutal beings that we see. So today I'll be talking about 5 female characters and how life screwed them over and put them on the path that they walked along, with the real life historical events that truly shaped them into the people that they become. So, without further ado, let's start off with our main girl. Revy is probably the best known for being a badass, being that she's one of the main characters. We see a lot of her achievements in the series. But how Revy got this way is a tragedy on its own. Born Rebecca Lee in a poor Chinese American ghetto in New York City, Revy was raised by an abusive father. Revy prayed for relief, believing that everything would get better for her until one night she was arrested, beaten, and sexually assaulted by the police. After the incident, she would take her father's life. It was that day that Revy vowed to never go through all of that ever again. Being that the series takes place in the mid-1990s, it's safe to assume that Revy grew up in New York during the 70s and 80s, which was a dark time in the city's history. People like to complain that New York is bad, and yeah, there's a lot wrong with it, but let me tell you, the New York of today is nothing compared to the New York of that era, in which it was dirty, full of crime and corruption, to the point where New York was known as the murder capital of the United States during that time. So growing up in this environment, Revy learned that in order to keep people from messing with you, you had to have money and power.
Is money your god?
It's power. Something a lot more useful than God. What's left for a poor little Chinese bitch to rely on? It's money, of course, and guns. Fucking A.
She wanted to join the Lagoon Company along with Dutch, and she would express her newfound freedom by shooting anyone who got in her way. And for a while she enjoyed it until she met Rock. To Revy, Rock was everything she was not. Polite, diplomatic, educated, and even compassionate. At first, Revy hated Rock, seeing him nothing more than dead weight and a reminder of the people who looked down on her. But as time goes on, she begins to admire him. Now how the relationship is interpreted depends on the viewer, ranging from a dysfunctional married couple to siblings. But in the end, Revy views Rock as a sense of normalcy, and in a way, hope. When she visits Japan with him, she tries to convince Rock to see his family, even though Rock is on the best terms with them.
My family doesn't exactly get along. My older brother turned out well and got a government job. But I got into college a year late, and that was that. They didn't expect much.
From my point of view, your family is normal. Isn't it worth it to at least go visit them?
Despite Rock's family being neglectful, Revy still sees it as normal, as compared to what she's grew up with, anything was better. Even in Japan, she actually feels normal as she plays festival games and has fun playing with children. She believes she can finally have a second chance and settle down with Rock there. But once she meets a Japanese gangster by the name of Genji Masasaki, she finds a kindred spirit and mutual respect for him, as they're basically the same, 2 hardened criminals who want a better life for themselves. However, after fighting alongside and later battling the tall Yakuza, she realizes that she can never have a normal life. That people like her were never meant to have that kind of stuff. That being said, she still holds out hope for Rock, but it soon changes later on. Along the way, she meets a young maid by the name of Fabiola, who had a similar background to her, as she grew up in the slums of Venezuela with 13 siblings and 2 hardworking parents. Despite these circumstances, Fabiola turned out different, as her parents loved her and tried their best to raise her and her siblings. To Revy, this is an alien concept, as it's shocking that someone who grew up in the same kind of life that she did actually became a decent person. And her faith in Rock is shaken as she tries to be the demon he tried not to be in order to get Roberta, who we'll talk about both in a bit. And it's Revy who tries to get him back on the side of good, and after the whole incident, while she still worries for him, she's happy that he's back to his somewhat moral self. For Revy, she likes to act like she doesn't care, but in reality she's just a scared little girl who really just wants a better life for herself. The boss of Hotel Moscow, a branch of the Russian mafia, Balailka is the embodiment of girl boss, gatekeep, and gaslight. She is not one to be trifled with, and despite her gender, she has the respect of her men. She has major mommy-dommy energy, and the only reason I don't simp for her is because she smokes like a chimney. Yeah, I don't find smoking to be attractive. You can call me a coward, a weak, or whatever, I don't care, I just don't like it. Joking aside, Balailka's past was basically a string of failures and events out of control that led her to this. Sofia Plavona was born into a military family in the Soviet Union. Her father was branded a traitor and had to flee the country, so she was raised by her grandfather or uncle, depending on your version, who was an officer in the Soviet army. In order to redeem her family name, she was able to participate in the 1980 Olympics, which were held in Moscow. For Sofia, being in this all-time big sporting event on the world stage was a great honor for her, her family, and her country. And she was hoping that she can do it again in the 1984 Olympics, which were held in Los Angeles. But unfortunately, she would serve her country in a more destructive way. Throughout the 1980s, the USSR would be embroiled in a disastrous war in Afghanistan. Pavlana would join the paratroopers, where she would fight in some of the bloodiest battles of the war, and where she would gain the nickname Balailka. Also during the war, she would also gain her iconic scar on her right side of her face. However, just when the war ended and the troops came back from the fighting, the USSR fell. Balailka went into a deep depression but soon found new meaning in life. Here she would take the survivors of her own unit and become part of the Russian mafia. In Ranapar, she made a name for herself, however many did not respect her both as an outsider and as a woman.
Again with that mouth of yours, huh? A fucking peasant Ivan bitch who thinks her shit don't stink.
I guess we can't all be Italian, right? Which reminds me, I've heard that Gretel guts tend to smell like a pig's. Is that true?
Fucking bitch.
So she would use her military experience to make the competition bow to her, as she would use extreme violence to make her on top, with the only ones seeing her as equals were the Lagoon Company and the Chinese Triads. Though with the latter, it's more like a loose alliance, as the Triad's boss, Mr. Chang, is just trying to keep the peace between the various criminal gangs. Even in the Russian mafia, she's still seen as lesser, so she has to show her compatriots on who really is running the show.
Explain something to you. There are two things in this world that I just cannot stand. One is called blintzes, and the other is useless, incompetent ex-KGB shitheads.
Still, there's a sense of bitterness that Balailka has. She hates being a criminal and believes that she and her men should have died in Afghanistan. In fact, Balailka feels a sense of jealousy towards the American soldiers, as she feels they were better treated when they came back, even though it couldn't be farther from the truth.
You fought in Afghanistan? Our country's humiliation was Vietnam.
Different nations, different battlegrounds.
My men saw the same things and fought just as desperately as your soldiers did. But tell me, if we're both from the elite units of our nations, then why did our country treat us like outcasts?
The Soviet war in Afghanistan was one of its great humiliations. It was considered to be the USSR's Vietnam. Like their American counterparts in Vietnam, along with the future Russian soldiers that were fighting in places like Chechnya and Ukraine, many Soviet soldiers were sent to fight in a war they had no business in. A hostile land that left many dead and many returning soldiers broken. A pointless endeavor that brought pain to those who are still living to this day. It didn't help that when many of these soldiers came back, the Soviet Union dissolved, as the war was one of the reasons why the USSR fell, thus breaking the will of many of these troops. What was the point of it all when the country you fought for doesn't exist anymore? The fact that Balailka is a woman who commanded her own unit is nothing short of amazing, as women in the Soviet military during the war were regulated the non-combatant roles, such as nurses and administrators. Because they were seen as civilian roles, the Russian government has refused to pay these female veterans any pensions and benefits that they deserve. Balailka only wanted to serve her country. Had she not gone to war, maybe she would have been a great Olympian. Or had she died in Afghanistan, she would have died a war hero. But instead, she carries the physical and mental scars of her past. This Latina Terminator is not one you want to mess with. She is an unstoppable force of nature that will do anything in her path to achieve her goal. However, Roberta's tragedy involved escaping from her past. Born Rosarita Cisneros, not much is known about Roberta's childhood, but she was trained in Cuba to become the ultimate soldier. Rosarita would fight for the left-wing FARC rebels during the Colombian Civil War. Well, one of them, since sadly the country has been a constant state of war since its beginnings. But the modern Colombian Civil War was one that ravaged the country that still affects to this day, as the war is sadly still going on. As the FARC rebels believe that by overthrowing the government, they can establish socialism in the country. The FARC rebels were also known for having a ton of female soldiers who would fight for their cause. Rosarita would do unspeakable things during the war, killing many people including innocent civilians, earning her the nickname the Bloodhound of Florencia. She believed in FARC's ideology until she realized she was a tool for the drug cartels. You see, FARC would fund their operations by dealing with the cartels and transporting drugs through the region. In fact, I knew someone who was affected by this. In high school, my Spanish teacher, who I will call Senor Lopez, was Colombian. A jovial, nerdy man who, despite his thick accent, was loved by almost all the students. However, in Colombia, his family were chicken farmers. But when the FARC rebels came in, they destroyed his farm and converted it for their drug operations. While Senor Lopez is doing well in life, it's sad to hear this kind of violence happen to good people. And Rosarita realized how much it hurt those she was supposed to fight for, and because of that, she decided to desert. However, due to her war crimes, she was wanted in several different countries. With nowhere else to go, she went to Venezuela where she would come in contact with Diego Lovelace, an old friend of her father's. Thankful for Diego's kindness, she offered her service where she would become his maid and taking the new name, Roberta. She would then go on to befriend Diego's son, Garcia. For Roberta, her new life was great, a chance to start over again, until her past catches up with her. Garcia will be kidnapped by the cartels and he will be transported by the Lagoon Company to whatever destination they choose. And in response, Roberta goes on a rampage to find her young master, killing the cartels. However, unfortunately for her, Garcia saw the true her and was scared out of his mind. But despite all that, Garcia still cares for Roberta, and after a fight to a standstill with Revy, she finally gets the happy ending that she wanted. Or so we thought. Later on the road, Diego gets involved in politics and wants to change his country for the better. That is, until he's assassinated by the US. Yeah, unfortunately this is a lot more common than you think, as the United States has a long history of interference in Latin America. Whether it be invasions, coups, or even assassinations. In fact, there's a joke in Latin America that they have. Why hasn't there been a coup in the United States? Because there's no US embassy in Washington, D.C. And Diego, unfortunately, is just another victim of US imperialism. Devastated by the loss of the man who gave her a second chance in life, Roberta vows for revenge and goes on another rampage, vowing to kill anyone who was involved in the assassination. She respects and loves the Lovelace family and is willing to do anything for them.
There's only one person that I serve, one person who can leash me, and that's Garcia Fernando Lovelace. He is my only master. For him, I would wade in the shit and mud of this world and give my life to save his. It is for him alone that I kill and seek revenge on those who destroyed his family. For him, I have severed all my old allegiances.
But once Garcia sees her again at her lowest point, she loses all of her sanity. It also doesn't help that she feels immense guilt for the innocent people she has killed, believing she's not worthy for forgiveness, especially having illusions of a Japanese man she killed a while back. After losing her mind, she goes full Terminator, killing anyone who is on her shit list. After an extreme game of cat and mouse with her losing several limbs, she ends up shooting Garcia as she believes it's not the real him. But after she's done the deed, she feels immense regret, but thankfully he survives and she and Garcia are reunited. After the event, Roberta finally lives the peaceful life she so desperately wanted. Roberta's tale is a form of karma. She is a woman who's trying to become a better person and do right, but due to her past catching up with her, she ends up going back to her old ways. As the saying goes,
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. Now, I'm going to give a warning as this segment contains the following. If you want to skip this, please go to this part here. You have been warned. Gretel and her twin brother Hansel were born in Romania in the 1980s. Because their parents couldn't take care of them, they were put in a state-run orphanage. After the overthrow and death of the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, the Romanian mob took over the orphanage and did horrible, I mean horrible things. They forced the children to do unspeakable acts such as make them act in X-rated films and slaughter each other. These inhuman acts broke the minds of the twins and became professional killers. The two would go on a killing spree, attacking anyone who was unfortunate enough to be in their path. They would be hired by the Italian mafia to take out Balailka and Hotel Moscow. As you can imagine, for both parties, this was a big mistake, as Hansel and Gretel would kill and torture Balailka's men, and they would soon turn against the mafia. There's also a high chance that these two have personality disorder, as they tend to switch identities, so no one truly knows who is Hansel and who is Gretel. Afterwards, the two would separate from each other to find their respective targets. Gretel would then go on to threaten Revy's nun friend, who is also a CIA agent, Etta. Long story. Anyway, when Etta asks why the twins are doing these horrible acts, Gretel's response is chilling.
Why, you ask? Why do we continue? What a question! You're so funny. Because we want to. We don't need any other reason.
Christ, this child is fucking terrifying. Meanwhile, we see that Hansel is going to confront Balailka, but he would go on to face a slow, painful death as he enacted her wrath. Gretel, on the other hand, would end up with the Lagoon Company, where she experienced something different. Here, Rock shows kindness, and for Gretel, this is a new feeling. For the first time, someone other than her brother showed her compassion, and she didn't know how to handle it. To the point where the way of thanking him was rather unorthodox. But aside from that, she was willing to start a new life and hoped to reunite with Rock. That is until she was taken out by an assassin hired by Hotel Moscow. Her final words being,
It's beautiful. The sky.
Unlike her brother, Gretel's death was quick and painless, looking out the blue sky that she wanted to see. Under the communist government of Romania, abortion and reproduction rights were restricted. This was to be sure that there would be a future workforce. However, many of the citizens were poor and couldn't take care of the children. So it was the government's job to take care of these neglected children. Unfortunately, the conditions of these orphanages were abhorrent and many of the children were abused. When communism fell in Romania, many of these children were forced onto the streets, traumatized by what they've been through, creating a lost generation for Romania. There were attempts for these children to have better lives, with many adoption agencies allowing for the children to be adopted by foreigners. However, there's issues such as corruption, bribery, and some of the families not being suitable for the children. In fact, to give another personal story, I knew one of these orphans, believe it or not. Let's call her Ramona, who along with being Romanian, was also a Romani, or Gypsy if you want to be politically incorrect. Ramona the Romanian Romani just rolls off the tongue. Sounds like a children's book. Anyway, Ramona was adopted by a Jewish American military family who believed that they couldn't have children. However, when their actual blood child came, they ignored and neglected Ramona. It didn't help that she was brainwashed into being a Zionist with an unhealthy love for Israel. Ramona joined the US Army, and she was actually a part of my squad when we were part of the Army ROTC. She even wanted to join the Israeli Defense Force as a way to please her adoptive father. I lost touch with Ramona after college, and I don't know what happened to her. Now, that's not to say all of these adoption stories ended in tragedy, as some of the orphans did find families who loved them dearly, and some would reunite with relatives who were willing to take them in. Had Gretel and her brother had a loving family, maybe they wouldn't have turned out the way they did, with a terrible fate in the end. Despite being born into a powerful Yakuza family known as the Washimine, Yukio's father wanted her to have a normal life and not get involved in the family business. Even after her father's death, many in the Yakuza wanted to keep Yukio out of it. When a rival gang becomes a threat, the Washimine crime family would enlist the help of Hotel Moscow. However, Balailka becomes greedy and tries to eliminate all the competition, including the Washimines, to take over the Japanese underworld. After Balailka kills the Washimine's boss, Yukio becomes head of the family, with Genji being her right-hand man. Here, she tries to make plans against Hotel Moscow, but due to her inexperience as a leader, her crime family is dwindled by the day. She was then kidnapped by a rogue Yakuza member with his gang of street punks, but is rescued by Genji, Revy, and Rock. Despite being thankful to Rock, she sees him as the enemy because he's technically working for Balailka. She plans to move her Yakuza clan to Branaport to have a swing in it, But when it's confronted by this, she realizes that it was all a dream, as she would have been torn apart by the criminals that were already there. And it's revealed that in the end, she was in love with Genji. So when Genji is killed by Revy, she decides to join her lover by ending it all. Everyone, and I mean everyone, wanted Yukio to stay out of the Yakuza. For people like Rock and Genji, Yukio reminded them of the normal life that they also wanted, but couldn't due to the circumstances. So much so that after Yukio's death, it broke Rock to the point where he became callous and manipulative, and almost went to the dark side that he so tried to avoid going to. But she states she chose her path and it gave her control, but as mentioned before, she just wanted to be with Genji.
So you see, I wasn't forced into this. I chose to do it. I chose to do my part for my father and those who loved him.
You can also see some parallels between Yukio and Balailka. Like her Russian counterpart, Yukio is a woman in a high position as part of a criminal organization where women are looked down upon. In fact, in the Yakuza, women are not allowed to be members, let alone bosses. And like Balailka, she's earned the respect of her men to the point that they're willing to die for her. Now, we see the demise of the Washimane crime family similar to that of the Yakuza in our world. You see, despite what many would think, the Yakuza's best days are behind them. After the end of a deadly gang war in the 1980s between rival Yakuza factions, the Japanese government would do everything in its power to take down the organization. With the government on their backs, the Yakuza were forced into hiding, and while they're still around and have some impact on society, they're not as powerful as they used to be. And like in the show, they also had to deal with the Russian Mafia, as they were also starting to encroach on the Yakuza's territory as well. Also, like in the series, you see that there is a new generation of Japanese criminals who are willing to go against the authority of the Yakuza. However, the Yakuza still manages to keep a stranglehold on the Japanese criminal world. This organization is not willing to give up what little power they have to a bunch of foreigners and street punks. And I almost forgot to mention this fact, but despite the fact the Yakuza is male-dominated, there was one female boss. After the death of boss Tazuo Kooka, his wife Fumiko would take charge of the organization. While it was supposed to be temporary, she would end up leading the Yamaguchi Gumi family for 3 years. Out of all the women in this video, Yukio actually had some normalcy in her life, but due to who her family was, she chose to be a part of it, which led to her unfortunate death. And that is the historical trauma of the women of Black Lagoon. Despite them being total badasses, in the end, they're all troubled souls where had things been different, maybe, just maybe, they would have lived normal lives.
Yeah, I believed it right up until that night the cops beat the hell out of me for no reason at all. All they saw when they looked at me was another little ghetto rat.
Now we've progressed so far that our energies are wasted on squabbles with petty hoodlums instead of honest wartime combat. I despise being one of the walking dead, and I am filled with envy for those who are still in the land of the living.
I would never join your damned revolution. Why? Because you and those foxes serve the same master. Your so-called principles. They're just illusions, and I'll never be fooled by them again.
And we lived at the orphanage. The only thing we ever got to see were those gray cement walls. I was born in a small town in the Carpathian Mountains. It was a dark and lonely place.
You've never had to choose. You say I had no choice. If I don't believe that I chose this, I can't have resolve. If someone's life, their honor, and their entire future depends on me, then of course I'm gonna fight for them.